A very pleasant good afternoon to all of our viewers. We are delighted that you have joined us for another edition of Let's Talk. We are always happy to share, to discuss. Let's Talk, of course, is a program sponsored by the South Leeward Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. We discuss issues. We have over the years, and I say years because we are on for 2 years plus now, we have discussed issues on a wide range of subjects, and this afternoon is going to be no exception. We have an exciting program lined up for you. In fact, we are starting a series today, a 2-week series, so we're going to take this discussion into next week. We are discussing the Christian and Carnival. It's Carnival here in Antigua, it's Carnival in St. Kitts, it's Carnival in several other places, Barbados, they call it crop over. But we're going to be discussing this question with respect to what should be the extent of the Christians' involvement in Carnival. Before we go any further, and before I introduce our guests for this afternoon discussion, we invite you to have a word of prayer with us. Almighty Father and our God, thank you for the privilege and opportunity to share on Let's Talk. We pray that you will be with us. We ask for your blessings on the technology. Grant that everything will go well, that your name will be glorified, and that our viewers and listeners will be blessed as a result. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, friends, again, it's Let's Talk time. In my opening welcome, I did not say those of you who are listening. We know that several of you listen on Second Advent Radio, whether it's B101.5 FM or through its various streaming platforms. We're delighted to have you. Those of you on Facebook, those of you on SLC Church Channel, and those of you on SLC Adventist. Welcome all. And this afternoon, as indicated, we are discussing this very important question on Carnival. What exactly is it, and where did it come from? We will consider or seek to answer the question, how should the Christian relate to Carnival? Along the way, we will consider such things as culture and the implication of culture, as well as music forms and other such matters. We will begin the discussion today and complete it next week, as I indicated before. And our discussion today will feature two very special guests. Perhaps, maybe a third will join us, I'm not sure. But for now, two very special guests. We have joining us from the University of the Southern Caribbean, we have Dr. Cyril Marshall. Dr. Marshall is an associate professor of church history at the University of the West Indies. I said West Indies, University of the Southern Caribbean. We are delighted to have Dr. Marshall with us. Dr. Marshall is married. He has been a minister of the gospel for, I believe, 22 or more years. And he has kindly consented to be with us to share. Dr. Marshall, it's a pleasure to have you with us on Let's Talk. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Delighted to have you, sir. And we have with us, shall I say, it is my delight to welcome a former president. When I was in CUC back then, it was called Caribbean Union College. It's now University of the Southern Caribbean. 30 plus years ago, Dr. Vernon Andrews was the president. I remember one conversation I had with him. I believe it might have been in my first or second year. He was trying to convince me to join the choir. I tried to tell him that I would be bad for his choir. We're delighted to have Dr. Vernon Andrews. He is an outstanding historian, a renowned musician, and as I said before, retired university president. We are delighted to have you, Dr. Andrews. Welcome to Let's Talk.
Thank you very much, Dr. Greene. My pleasure.
All right, we have lined up a very interesting discussion. We want to get straight to it because the time goes by very quickly. Now, over the years, I have heard a lot of people talk about Carnival and to what extent Christians should be involved in Carnival. Some say that Christians should not attend Carnival. Others say that Carnival is Christian, and others argue that certain aspects of Carnival are just expressions of cultural norms and therefore should be considered as appropriate. So we want to begin by looking at the origins of this festival that has become so central to many Caribbean cultures. And, you know, in selecting my guests for this afternoon, I made an attempt to get individuals who are from what we call the Carnival capital of the Caribbean. Yes, over in Trinidad, I know that your Carnival is at a different time. We will get to that in time. But I want to ask, what exactly is Carnival? What are its origins? I don't know which one of you want to begin, perhaps Dr. Marshall.
Okay. All right. Thanks again to be here, and greetings to all listeners and viewers. What is Carnival? The word Carnival, in terms of its basic meaning, means farewell to the flesh. Right? It's a time where you say bye to flesh and other things associated with animal products. And as you usher in the Lenten season, that 40-day period, which is important within the Catholic and to a certain extent also the Anglican tradition, that 40-day period that begins with Ash Wednesday and ends with Good Friday, right? So that period of Lent is a period of fasting. So Carnival is really supposed to be saying, okay, we're gonna give us this thing one last good hit, and then for the next 40 days, we are not going to be with it anymore. So we're going to say farewell for the next 40 days to the flesh. In terms of its origins, I don't want to overtalk, right? But Carnival, actually, some think that Carnival is something that came up within Christianity, but actually Carnival predates Christianity, right? In terms of, well, the celebration, right? Not necessarily the term, but in terms of the celebration, it actually predates Christianity. And maybe a little later on, I'll get a little bit more into that.
Okay, thank you so much. Dr. Andrews, do you want to add anything to that?
Not really. Dr. Marshall certainly touched the ground. And I am not a historian in spite of the very kind comment, but I'm certainly not a church historian, as Pastor Marshall is. And as you rightly said, living in Trinidad and Tobago, the land of Carnival, one can hardly not be exposed to many of the factors surrounding it. Now, let me take a slightly different tack, but it will touch on some of the things that Dr. Marshall mentioned. Let me start this way. In Barbados, there's a place called Six Roads. Some of you who are listening may know of this. Six Roads is a point where 6 different and discrete roads with separate identities, quote unquote, if there's such a thing, come together at a point. 6 different roads coming together at a point. And one of the occasions when I passed there, something struck me. Say, wait a minute. Let me do a presentation entitled 6 Roads to the Hymn. I'm not going to do that this afternoon, but I want to draw on that a little bit as I start to talk about Carnival by identifying some things. And I'm sure Dr. Marshall could help me if I reach a sticky point. First of all, time and place. Carnival takes place within a context of a time and a place. That's point one. Now, at this point, our time and place is July 31, 3 p.m., and the broadcast is originating in Antigua, but not limited to. but that's a significant point. And we could say, still in time and place, it's the South Leeward Conference. But it is expanded when we think about Carnival to the Caribbean. Not only Trinidad and Tobago, St. Lucia, Antigua, Dominica, and other territories of the Caribbean. I'll make one more point before I close up on this. And we are addressing the matter of the Christian and the Carnival. And as Dr. Marshall intimated, Carnival did not only start at that point, but there were many predecessors. But I will stop there at this point before we explore other aspects of the topic.
Well, you know, it's interesting because based on what you said, Dr. Andrews and Dr. Marshall earlier, you clearly highlighted a connection to some Christian tradition, so that some see Carnival as having a clearly Catholic Christian connection. Dr. Marshall, you mentioned Lent, you mentioned Ash Wednesday. There may be, I should say, but there may be some of our viewers who are not quite familiar with those terms, who may not necessarily have a Catholic background or an Anglican background. I grew up in the Anglican church. Well, let's say I was an Anglican when I was a child. And so I remember going to school, and on this particular Wednesday, you would have to go and you would get that ash on your head. There are things like Palm Sunday. And you mentioned the idea of Lent. So if you could just say a little bit more so that we can get the connection, that may just help some of our viewers.
Okay. Interestingly enough, for the first 17 years of my life, I was Catholic, right? I went to a Catholic primary school as well. The idea with Lent is a period of fasting. Meaning it's not total abstinence from food, but it's a period of fasting, denial of the self and the bodily pleasures, so to speak, in preparation for the time when the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus are celebrated, Good Friday into Easter Sunday, that period. And the intention, I suppose, because I can't remember the exact theology of it, but I think the 40 days is supposed to be like a reflection of Jesus's 40-day fast that he had after his baptism, that we find in Matthew chapter 3 into Matthew chapter 4. So it's supposed to be a reflection of that, and it's self-denial so that you will be more spiritually prepared. And within all Christian communions, there is this general understanding, as far as I'm aware, that there is a connection between self-denial and getting spiritually prepared for a closer walk with God. So you deny self, whether some bodily appetites or some bodily pleasures, things like that. There's the connection there that doing so helps to prepare you for a closer walk with God. So that is what Lent is supposed to do. So you stay away from certain things during Lent. Interestingly enough, I have a friend, a very close friend of mine, who is an Adventist, has been one all his life, grew up in Adventist faith. And every year for Lent, this friend stays away from certain foods, right? He says, well, it's a healthy thing to do. So during that 40-day period, he stays away from certain things. I remember growing up, during Lent, you don't eat any meat, right? You eat fish, but you don't eat any meat. And right in Trinidad, because of such a strong Catholic tradition, at KFC, during Lent, you'll get fish, right? No, you still have chicken, but during Lent, you will get chicken for sale. Fish, sorry, for sale. So that is what that period is supposed to be all about.
And the Lenten season is supposed to lead up to the Easter weekend. Is that correct?
The Easter weekend, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Easter weekend. So traditionally, when Easter weekend comes, when Easter Sunday comes, actually, it's more celebratory, right? Up to Good Friday, Glorious Saturday is a bit more solemn, but Easter comes, it's just to coincide the whole idea of the resurrection of Jesus, and it's more celebratory. Yeah.
Now, Dr. Andrews, go ahead. Yes.
Yes, if I may come in here. Now, I don't know whether Dr. Marshall was ever exposed or whether you, Dr. Greene. I am not a theologian. As I used to tell my classes, and I taught primarily ministers in training, I said I classify myself as a latent theologian. But it is difficult to be brought up as a Seventh-day Adventist in a Seventh-day Adventist home with Seventh-day Adventist parents without, and also attending Seventh-day Adventist institutions without inculcating some of the basic principles which underlie our faith, so that as we think about the Christian and Carnival, there's a word I want to get back into more fully, which is culture. Let me just state at this point, I think that is a word that is misused and misunderstood and misapplied in many things as it relates to Christian behavior. I just make that point and stop here. But let me make another point. When we look at the larger picture of the world, we recognize that there is a clash and a conflict between good and evil. You must never lose sight of that. And to see how that plays out in many aspects of Christian life and living. Even when we come to the matter of Carnival and the flesh, and when we deny the fleshly desires, and when we probably should emphasize the more spiritual needs. But we can expand on that as we go along.
Well, we certainly will do, and we will definitely get to the concept, the cultural dynamics. But before we go there, I believe that it might be troubling, in fact, a surprise to some persons, especially individuals who grew up as Seventh Adventists or perhaps more Protestant Christians, to begin to consider anything Christian about the kind of festivities surrounding Carnival. As a little boy, I was a member of the Anglican community. I mentioned that before. Of course, the Anglican community in many ways is similar to the Catholic community. And I recall quite vividly that with Monday, Whitsuntide being the celebration of the descent of the Holy Spirit on the disciples, there was this tradition for us in the Anglican community. It was a carnival type celebration. I remember that they would put a perimeter fence around the compound of the church. The church had quite an expanse of land, and then the steel orchestras and the brass bands and so on would come, and it would be quite a carnival type celebration. So let me ask, what is unchristian about such celebrations? Now, it may be necessary to explain the term Christian meaning the religion and Christian meaning the committed follower of Jesus. But what is unchristian about such celebrations? I remember when I was in Caribbean Union College, one year we hiked over the mountains to go to Maracas Bay, and we had some transportation problems coming back. There were 6 minibuses that were supposed to come to collect us. 5 came, and as the president of the Associated Student Body, I did this sensible thing to stay back with the last group. Well, that bus never came. So we had to hitchhike, do all kinds of things. And we eventually got transportation. And that transport led us right into the heart of the Carnival activity. Now, for a bunch of theology students coming from Caribbean Union College, it was quite a shock to end up right in the center of the Carnival activities. That was quite something else. Now that picture, and you both are from Trinidad, you understand what I'm talking about. What is, how do we make that connection to think that something like this is Christian?
Okay. The original concept of Carnival I mentioned earlier on, and this is where I have to come back. It was actually within what we call pagan Europe, right? It was actually a spring, well, just before spring fertility festival, right? That's where the origins are. And one of the reasons, one of the things that came along with it, because you could recognize that those who have Carnival February, March, thereabouts, that is towards the end of winter in the Northern Hemisphere, right? So it's towards the end of winter. And what happens is that towards the end of winter, you looking forward to spring when new life comes around. And within the pagan worship system, spring is an important time. So you have these fertility cults, right? Celebrating the rebirth of life, moving out from the dead of winter into the life of spring, into summer, right? Another thing that coincided with it is this. Towards the end of winter, now in the fall, and late fall, you would have festivals then, and animals would be slaughtered, and you would have meats being preserved more or less naturally. The temperature would help to keep it preserved. However, as spring is coming along, the place gets warmer. So what happens then is that you have to consume the flesh before spring comes around, where the place gets warm and it will be lost. All right. It's so interestingly enough, the practice of Carnival and the revelry and so on was around even before Christianity. When the Christian message was being spread among the so-called barbarians, right? The Germanic, Teutonic tribes, whichever term you choose. When it was being spread, those practices were already there, right? And what happened is that the people were accustomed to these practices. So what the church did is actually, this is not a nice thing to talk about, but it's actually baptized paganism, right? So the practice was there, and then it was associated with this period before the Passion Weekend, right? Leading up to the Passion Weekend. So that practice continued. So in terms of what is really Christian about it, I would say nothing. A Christian spin was placed upon it, but it was a practice that predated Christianity. It was a practice that was around in the time. I was doing some research on it, and it is believed, right? And this common flow is, anybody who has done ancient history should be aware of it. It was a practice among the Egyptians, the Greeks, and the Romans. Because the Greeks borrowed from the Egyptians and the Romans borrowed from the Greeks, right? So a lot of the activities associated with Dionysius, that's the Greek god of wine, and among the Romans, that's Saturn, and you have the Saturnalia festival, right? Which is a time of revelry and so on, just as you have with modern day Carnival. Now, interestingly enough, let me just give some more information. As early as the time of Gregory the Great, he was Pope from 590 to 607. As early as that time, right? And you have barbarian tribes, so-called barbarian tribes being converted at that time. As early as that time, there were Christian persons and preachers who started to speak against the carnival activities. Why? Because they felt what was happening within the church was really paganism. 150 years later, there was a synod around the year 743 that voted against the practice of carnival because it seemed to be un-Christian, right? I mean, a synod it was a synod in Belgium, nowadays Belgium. So it's not as big like a universal council like Ephesus and Nicaea and so on, right? So individuals recognized at that time that the practices of carnival weren't really consistent with the practices of the church. But the church leadership, I suppose, would have felt that it would have been beneficial to the church because we have all these people, all right? And they want to have their festivities, so let them have it. We just put a Christian spin on it, all right? And there are other things during that time where you had incidences of what do I call baptized paganism. There are other aspects, there are other things that came into Christianity that were practices that were being carried out by these so-called pagans, and then they continued with a Christian name affixed to them.
Now that's an interesting concept you're sharing there. So what I'm hearing from you, therefore, is that you had a situation where there was an already established practice. When Christianity came along, Christianity sought to utilize the established festival, and maybe something similar to other Christian festivals, Christmas and the like, where you know there is need for a celebration. Well, let's use the date that is already available there, and so that is an interesting blend. We are going to go into in a little while some details with respect to the nature of the celebration and what it is or is not. But you know, Seventh-day Adventists, and Dr. Marshall, you mentioned earlier that even within mainstream Christianity in the very early stages, that there were some who were protesting against the involvement of the church in this kind of vulgarity. The Seventh-day Adventist Church is a Protestant denomination. Might it be that a part of what we protest against, the unchristian element, might it be part of our protest to speak out against the vulgar elements of such celebrations? I don't know, Dr. Andrews, maybe you may want to take a go at that one.
Well, first of all, I like the spin provided by Dr. Marshall on the historical aspects. But now, let me, without bringing it to center stage yet, but as I said, let's start with time and place. We in July 31, 2023. Let's turn back the clock. 100 years, 50 years, what have you. There's no question that many aspects of Carnival in our part of the world has changed. I recall, and I was drawing it to the attention of someone earlier on, in my boyhood days, I grew up in the town of St. Joseph, which is not far from Maracas. I lived on a street called Buena Vista Street. We lived on the southern end of that street. It was not a terribly long street. And on the western end, I can still remember, I don't recall how old I was, I don't think I was 10 yet, standing in front of my house on Buena Vista Street, looking up the street, and a carnival band was beginning to process down Buena Vista Street. I can distinctly recall their garb. A white top the ladies had, and the bottom was a blue long skirt, reaching right down to the feet and the toes, so that the ladies and the gentlemen were appropriately attired in a carnival band. I don't know whether I should amuse you or disabuse you by saying what they were singing. I can still remember it was a calypso, and I will give the gist of it, because it was a play on the Shango Baptist religion. And they're talking about the man in the band with a candle in his hand, shouting, "Ram Goat Baptism." This is what they were saying. I remember that as distinctly as though it were yesterday. But the point I'm trying to bring out is that the attire was completely different. Now, I doubt I would ever see, if I chose to go to a carnival activity on a Sunday or Monday or Tuesday, to see the ladies attired that way in 2023. So what I'm saying is, so many things have changed. I probably could say that the flesh has gotten the ascendancy over many other aspects of it.
So it's interesting. It's interesting that we identified the carnival celebration, at least from the Christian perspective, as a time when they are preparing to go into the Lenten season, which is supposed to be a denial of the flesh. But what we see these days is a celebration that really is highlighting and emphasizing flesh, quote unquote, now, not the physical meat I'm talking about now, but the carnal nature.
Right.
Dr. Andrews, you're hinting at something, and perhaps it's time for us to go there. But let me just say to our viewers, I do understand that one of the chats is disabled. I believe it is an SLC Adventist. Unfortunately, a few individuals misuse the chat, but we're asking that you subscribe so that we are putting on subscribers chat only, and that may assist you with being able to post your comments. Now, let's talk about the cultural dimension. Let's go there. But perhaps I should just back up a little bit, because we have a situation where in Antigua, in Barbados, and St. Kitts and the like, you have a situation where Carnival is celebrated in connection with emancipation, right? In Trinidad and more predominantly Catholic territories, Carnival still has the tradition of being celebrated somewhere around February, at the beginning of the Lenten season. So the connection to emancipation, the connection to emancipation, the concept, and we're going to go into the cultural dimension now, but many countries in the Caribbean have moved Carnival away from it just being a celebration before Lent to something that is supposed to be celebrating emancipation from slavery. Am I correct with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Actually, as you said that there, this connection between Carnival and emancipation is something, even though in Trinidad, Carnival is connected to the Easter season. But the connection between the expression of the people and so on with emancipation, that connection is there. You know, it's not at the same time, but the connection is there. Because I mean, emancipated, you're free, and the idea of emancipation is good. It's we you know, the tomorrow is it's interesting enough. Trinidad and Tobago was the first nation to declare Emancipation Day a public holiday back in, I think it was 1983, somewhere thereabouts. You know, so that is something big, you know, emancipated from slavery, and we know about how terrible that experience was. At the same time, can I celebrate being emancipated from slavery, physical slavery, while at the same time celebrate being emancipated from the bondage of sin? I would say yes, because that's the word slavery, bondage to sin. So I celebrate the fact of emancipation, you know, not just from slavery, from the British, but emancipation from slavery to sin, and that is the biggest celebration of them all, in my opinion. In other words, I don't have to jump on the streets scantily clad or well clad as the individuals in Dr. Andrews' Carnival band on Buena Vista Street in St. Joseph, whatever year that was. Whichever way, I don't have to do that to celebrate the fact that I'm emancipated. As a matter of fact, I actually think I celebrate that every day, you know, because every day I'm thankful to God for freeing me from the bondage of sin, which is the best emancipation of them all. So it's not that I'm downplaying what happened when the slaves were emancipated, and I'm not downplaying that, because that is very important. But what I'm saying is that I recognize the importance of understanding freedom, not just as a slave in the Caribbean, but freedom from sin. I recognize that. I see how important that is. So I want to celebrate that, right? And I just want to say one other thing here. There is a picture that is presented to us that if we don't do certain things, now this is a catch-22 in a sense, that if we don't do certain things, that we are denying our true cultural heritage, right? It's like this, Dr. Andrews. It's like being a Trinidadian and you never ate doubles. You know, it's like that's like a denial of your cultural heritage. You're like, you never ate doubles, so you're not a Trinidadian. You know, you never ate a roti. Something's wrong with you. Never ate pilau. Something's wrong with you. You know, so there is that thing. And like, do you know in Carnival, something's wrong. You're denying your cultural heritage. The way I see it, now I have been on both sides, because I grew up from a Catholic perspective. I know it is to go to Carnival and thing. And Dr. Greene, interestingly enough, I have my own experience to share quickly. In 1994, I was in USC, not there, as a theology student. I went to camp in Grand Riviere, and have to travel from Sangre Grande to Maracas Valley here. And I had to pass through Carnival in Sangre Grande as well as in Arriba, you know, and everybody is, I mean, passing through the middle of the band with the back on the shoulder. And to tell the truth, I wasn't even aware of what was going on around me. I was just focused on just passing through as quickly as possible, you know. But I know what it is like to be out in Carnival and jumping and behaving crazy. I know about that. I experienced that as well, right? And I said that to say this. Looking back at it, I don't see that as making me more Trinidadian. And I don't see not indulging in that kind of practice as making me less Trinidadian. I don't see it as denying my culture, right? Because I have a new perspective. My perspective is this: my culture is determined primarily by my citizenship. And my citizenship is not on earth, but it is in heaven. So that I want to represent heaven and not earth. So my first allegiance is not to Trinidad and Tobago cultural expressions, but my first allegiance is to God. And so as a Christian,
Dr. Marshall, let me interject here a little bit. I mean, that's a very interesting slant, and I'm sure Dr. Andrews is going to have to say something on that. But let me introduce a little bit, because next week we're going to look at the elements of music and pageantry and that kind of thing. But I want us to look a little more at the cultural elements and our attitudes towards such. So it's interesting that you're talking about that. I was in a conversation with a brother who was responsible for the organizational aspects of Carnival in Antigua. He argued that Carnival is really about showcasing our culture. Culture is, of course, much more comprehensive than what transpires over a few days of celebrations. And as you mentioned, in fact, you're carrying it a little further. Culture is a way of life. Culture is not all good or all bad necessarily.
Yeah.
So should we as Christians relate to elements of our culture that challenge the effective practice of our beliefs? You mentioned just now, Dr. Marshall, that your real culture is heaven. But if we speak from I'm not going back to a course in cultural anthropology, for example. I don't know that we can divorce ourselves from our culture, the way of life, in terms of our practices, our language. I mean, if I were born in Trinidad and grew up in Trinidad, I would have a different accent than I do here, etc. And we may say that all those dimensions are cultural, but I'm making the point that culture is not necessarily all bad or all good. So to what extent do I determine that, hey, this thing, and especially when it comes to something that goes against my Christian belief? And I think I heard you making the point that your connection to Christ is supposed to transcend your connection to culture. Perhaps
right.
That's what it is.
Yeah, like I said, my first allegiance is to God.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Now, I don't want to bat out of my crease. All right. But because when we talk about culture and Christianity, there are always some blurry lines, right? But my first allegiance is to God, and I have to ask myself, based on the dictum given by Paul, whatsoever you eat, whatsoever you drink, or whatsoever you do all to the glory of God. And I have to ask myself, if I let's suppose I have no alcohol, right? So I have no alcohol. I saw you had a program earlier, Dr. Greene, on the Christian and alcohol. So let's suppose I have no alcohol, right? But I am jumping up in a bar, right? I am not scantily clad. It's not bikinis and beads, right? Maybe let's suppose like a probably pretty mass, as we call it in Trinidad, right? So let's suppose I am not scantily clad, but I am jumping up on a band. The music is blasting at full, and of course, ladies of all shapes and sizes and descriptions all around. Can I comfortably say and honestly say that in the midst of that this is to the honor and glory of God?
All right. Could I come in here,
Yes,
Dr.
you sound
Greene?
like you're responding. Go ahead.
Yes. My friend and colleague, Dr. Marshall, has brought things close, 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 almost to touching. And as I think you sort of intimated in a remark you made, it is not all clearly one way or the other. Let me cite some interactions. And by coincidence, they all relate to ladies. Some years ago, I attended an ecumenical council in St. Lucia. It was held in a Catholic facility. It was an eye-opener to me. An eye-opener to me. I listened to presenters from many different faiths, Catholic, Protestant, what have you, what have you. And I took it all in. One of the presentations was a composition of a well-known hymn. I don't recall it right now. A hymn we sing all the time in our church. The tune, I would say, wasn't bad, quote unquote, but it introduced a different element to what we have been singing or were singing or still sing. When I got up, gone back to CUC, the Sabbath Council was having a meeting in the chapel at the time. And I stepped in. And I introduced or attempted to teach them that new tune I learned in St. Lucia. So I got on the piano. It wasn't hard to play by ear, and I played it, and they sang it. One of the ladies, a good friend of mine, who was into music, stood up and made a comment. She said, you know, when I left whatever church it was she was in and joined the Seventh-day Adventist Church, she left that music behind. Didn't expect to be meeting that type of music in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. That stuck with me up to this day, and that's a long time ago. I often make the point to her now and then. That was point number one. In other words, there was a need for a break from that to which she was accustomed. That's experience number one. Let me condense the two other experiences into one. Again, ladies who were not members of the church, but joined the church. One lady said she doesn't listen to the radio or calypso at all because it takes her back into what she left. And the other lady was expressing a similar view. Now, let me see if I can bring it in concert to what Pastor Marshall was saying. Yes, we are converted and we serve. He didn't say that, but this is the idea of it. A higher God with a higher purpose. However, we've got to recognize that the devil is a wily foe. So that he mixes, he's an excellent alchemist and put things together in fanciful ways. And if we're not careful, we could be swept off our feet. I leave it there for the moment.
You know, Dr. Andrews, next week we're going to go into the calypso and the music genres and those kinds of things. So I'm going to wait until next week to ask you that question directly, because you mentioned something there, you're tempting me. But here is this now. It's just 30 or so years ago that I left CUC. But as I reflected on my time in CUC, I'm going to speed this up because I want to get to a question that somebody's asking here. But while I was at CUC, it was customary to expose ourselves to non-Christian cultural celebrations. We would go to Diwali and Eid just to see what was going on. The experience provided knowledge and understanding and made us better able to relate to people from those cultures. Of course, these are non-Christian practices, Hinduism and is it Muslim, I think.
Mhm.
Now, I suspect, I may be wrong and you could correct me, but I suspect that Trinidadian Hindus and Muslims get involved in Carnival as well. I am not sure, but I suspect.
Not as much. That's a
What
significant.
is the difference between going to view Diwali and going to view Carnival? I'm just asking.
Well, Muslims particularly tend to stay away from Carnival.
Okay.
A number of Hindus as well. But no, as we classify those as pagan customs with their roots in those elements. As we look at the Hindus and the multiple gods and so forth and so on, sort of a different kettle of fish. But we're beginning to swim, as I like to put it, we're beginning to swim where it is deep. We may not arrive at true perfect answers in a short while, but this is where God's Spirit works with us in the troublesome times in which we find ourselves. All right. I'm interested to get questions, but anyhow, let's see how things go.
You know, that question about what's the difference is an important question, and one that I've considered, and I can't say that I've given myself the appropriate answer. Right now, in terms of my experience and your experience, Dr. Greene, they're different. I grew up in a plural community, right? Some of my closest friends in growing up were Hindus. I grew up when it's Diwali, helping them cut bamboo, designing the bamboo, lighting diyas. That was part of growing up for me. So there's nothing to me to go and look at the lights, right? I've seen it a million times. I don't have to go and look at it, right? Someone from a different perspective, like you coming from Antigua, where you would have had very, very little exposure, if any at all, to Hinduism, going to see the lights and the decorations associated, it's very fascinating, because like, wow, I didn't know you could do all these things with bamboo, right? So it could be very fascinating. Carnival, on the other hand, of course, what Carnival entails, and especially within a Trinidadian context, Carnival lasts not just for 1 day or 2 days. Carnival lasts for probably from Christmas to Ash Wednesday, right? What happens in Carnival is a bit different. Now, I've heard stories. These stories I've heard. Dr. Andrews may be able to correct me there, that in olden days, at the same CUC, right, I've heard stories from folk from olden days, that the foreign, the North American and other places, faculty and so on, who was resident there, that they would pack their lunches and so forth and go in their cars and go down to the savannah and watch the carnival processions, the parade of the bands and so on. This is like a cultural awakening, so to speak. I don't know. All right, that's just stories I've heard. But to me, if one is really one is like approaching it from the perspective of somebody who is trying to get information, it's not the same as somebody who is a participant. But someone might say I'm being a hypocrite. But if I'm trying to find out information, like I'm doing research, you'll be exposed to all kinds of things in gaining information, right? But you don't participate in it actively. It's somewhat different. But for me, I don't have to go to Carnival. I know enough about Carnival, and of course, in today's world, information is easily available. I know we are running out of time, So
We are running out of time, and I want to stitch this in here. If viewers ask questions and we don't get to answer them today, we have next week, so we'll do that. Dr. Marshall, I know you may not be with us next week. Dr. Faz is going to be with us, so we'll pick it up from there. But is it possible to go to view for those persons who say, well, I'm just observing the culture? Now, by the way, the Antiguan experience is not very dissimilar to what is in Trinidad. A few years ago, I had to take somebody to the emergency room at the hospital on a Carnival Monday, and I was shocked to see how the folks dressed at Carnival. Here's this question, because those ladies literally had on nothing. I mean, there was a butterfly-shaped thing over the nipple of the breast, and I did not understand that people just like it was crazy. But is it possible that a young man could stand on the side of the road just watching these ladies gyrating themselves without being affected one way or the other? What's your view on that?
Probably if you're dead.
Dr. Andrews, quickly, our time is almost up.
All right. All I would say is I have never had the experience, but if I know human nature, I doubt it.
Interesting. Very, very quickly, somebody's asking, what was the question again? Should culture influence Christianity? Now, that's an interesting discussion. We don't have enough time to go into all of it, but
no.
should culture influence Christianity?
But
this is how I see it. Now, I'm not an expert in the area, right? But each individual has a cultural context, right? The Bible has a cultural context.
Mm-hmm.
We have a cultural context. We have various cultural contexts because from different places. So the way I understand certain things, the way I interpret certain things comes through my culture, right? So should culture influence Christianity? We say Christianity, we should not, it's not just about being countercultural, what I would call being transcultural, being beyond the culture, right? But at the same time, there are certain aspects, because we can't say culture is bad or culture is good, culture is culture. But there are certain aspects to it that what I would say would impact us and would shape the way we view God, the way we fellowship, the way we worship and all of that. These aspects are part culture. We can't escape it. They are part of it. They are all a part of it. Like last week at this time, past Dr. Greene, right? You were here, right here in Trinidad.
Yes.
And you had the parade of the different conferences.
Yes.
The auditorium and USC Steel Ensemble was playing, right? 30 years ago, that probably wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, I wish we had time to talk about that. Our time has expired. We have to end here. Next week, we're going to go into, as I mentioned, the elements of calypso. Should Christians sing calypso? What is the difference between the calypso, the soca, that kind of thing? Is there such a thing as gospelypso? That kind of stuff. So we want you, our viewers, to join us next week. We're going to be having Dr. Andrews will be back with us. He is the musician here. Unfortunately, Dr. Marshall is not going to be with us next week, but Dr. Faz, the Dean of the School of Theology, will be with us next week. It promises to be a very interesting discussion. May God bless you. That's all the time we have. And we will see you next week, 3 p.m. for another edition of Let's Talk.
You're welcome, sir.